In 2025, what was once a close partnership between the US and Canada suddenly spiraled into a fierce trade conflict over steel and aluminum. The US decision to impose a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum dropped the metal curtain at the Canadian border, sparking a brutal trade war and raising serious questions about the future of North American integration. The US and Canada, longtime allies with the world's longest unmilitarized border, had always been tightly bound in trade supply chains and defense cooperation, but in 2025, everything flipped under the guise of national security. Trump raised tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%, targeting a close ally at the signing ceremony. Trump declared, "Strong trade is a strong military, weak steel is a weak border." This felt like more than just an economic break, it was a rupture in trust. Ottawa was quick to react. The very next day, Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke out in a nationally televised address. He called this a global move, signaling that the US action would have consequences beyond just the bilateral relationship. He sent a stern message. Canada would retaliate, protecting national interests while trying to avoid disrupting the global order. One key phrase stood out in his speech: a unified Canadian economy. This wasn't just a catchy slogan, it marked a shift in Ottawa's economic thinking, moving from reliance on North American harmony to a commitment to creating a self-sustaining fortress. The very next morning, Canada introduced a framework for retaliatory tariffs. The tariff on US steel and aluminum would start at 25% and increase over time. The innovative part was that the tariff rate wasn't fixed, but would adjust automatically based on the pace of economic and security negotiations. Ottawa no longer had to wait for a cabinet meeting to make a decision. Tariffs could rise or fall depending on the situation. This wasn't the first time Canada had retaliated against Trump's steel tariffs. This happened in 2018, but this time the response was more measured and strategic. It wasn't just about tit for tat, it was about setting up a long-term strategy. According to Canada's Finance Minister, François Philippe-Champagne, federally funded infrastructure projects from modernizing naval ships to building high-speed rail lines would now be required to use Canadian-made steel and aluminum. International contractors could still bid, but they had to disclose the origins of their materials. Clearly, Canada wanted American businesses to build their factories within Canada. One of the most impactful and far-reaching measures Canada introduced was a strategic origin-based quota system for key steel and aluminum products. This meant that in addition to facing higher import tariffs, US exporters would be limited in the amount of goods they could send to Canada, with the possibility of retroactive enforcement. This rule came as a true shock to businesses and supply chains. Imagine a major manufacturing plant once reliant on a steady supply of materials, now facing not just skyrocketing material costs, but restrictions on the amount they could purchase each month. They would be forced to quickly find alternatives, adjust production plans, and cope with the threat of severe shortages. The short-term effects of tariffs and quotas were inevitable, impacting both economies for businesses, particularly those in key sectors like automotive and construction that consume large amounts of steel and aluminum. The sudden rise in input costs put enormous pressure on them. The uncertainty in trade policy also created a risky business environment, making companies hesitant to invest or expand production. The just-in-time supply chain model between the US and Canada, built on trust and efficiency, had been severely damaged. Cargo containers were being denied or stuck at ports, and supply chain managers in industrial centers like Detroit and Windsor struggled to find alternative sources, revealing how fragile the system was to policy shocks. This forced businesses to reconsider their strategies, possibly shifting to a just-in-case model, accepting higher storage costs to ensure supply, but sacrificing efficiency and competitiveness. Ultimately, the burden of these disruptions often fell on consumers, leading to higher prices on goods Canada also introduced the melt cast origin rule, which required products to prove that the melting and casting process occurred within the same value chain toll. This targeted American companies that had been skirting the rules by importing cheap steel from China, processing it in Mexico, and labeling it made in USA to qualify for trade benefits when exporting to Canada, with the new system Canada's Border Services Agency could rigorously verify product origins, protecting the domestic market from trade fraud faced with unprecedented challenges from the trade war. The Canadian government wasn't just focusing on short-term countermeasures, it was actively implementing long-term strategies to restructure the economy and boost domestic production capacity. A large-scale credit program worth $10 billion was set up and entrusted to the Canada Development Bank tool. This program aimed not only to provide low-interest loans to companies heavily impacted by tariffs, but also required businesses to submit a detailed plan to relocate their supply chains within Canada's borders to qualify for assistance. In parallel, Canada's industrial relocation and employment development strategy was ramped up through adjustments to the investment criteria of the Canada Infrastructure Fund. The fund would now prioritize infrastructure projects that use domestically produced metals. The US-Canada tariff war wasn't just a battle between two governments, it directly affected the everyday lives of people for consumers. The most noticeable consequence was a wave of price hikes on essential goods, cars, building materials, household appliances, and canned foods as steel and aluminum became more expensive. The reduced purchasing power and higher living costs hit hardest on middle and low-income families. The risk of widespread inflation forced many people to tighten their spending or dip into savings and investments for workers. The picture was more divided. The domestic steel and aluminum industries in Canada were temporarily shielded, helping maintain or even create jobs in metal refineries and processing plants. However, industries that used imported metals, like automotive construction and machinery manufacturing, found themselves cornered by soaring input costs. This led to the risk of reduced production, shorter working hours, and even layoffs. The disruption in the supply chain extended from large corporations to small subcontractors, leaving thousands of workers at every link in the chain facing uncertainty. For most people, this trade war wasn't a far-off political issue. It was a daily reality impacting their meals, jobs, and wallets. The 2025 tariff war between the US and Canada revealed a stark truth: no curtain is thick enough, no self-sufficiency is free amid the walls and bridges which choice will shape the future of North America and the global supply chain. Only time will tell. Can you ever imagine that Canada, the land of maple syrup and polite apologies, would actually say nope to the US when it comes to oil exports? Sounds like something out of a Hollywood blockbuster, not real life, but this could totally happen first. Here's a tough pill to swallow, kind of like raw Alberta beef. 60% of the oil the US imports comes from Canada, to be exact. That's 4 million barrels a day. It's like the US is blood-sucking. Oops, we mean oil sipping from Canada every morning, like it's a cup of coffee. So why Canada? Because the kind of oil they produce is heavy, like a Trump speech. And it just so happens to be a perfect match for the refineries along the US Gulf Coast. But here's the twist. Canada is getting tired of playing the quiet, loyal lover. They're now eyeing Europe with a look that says, oh, hello. Hey, you look like you need some oil, through potentially debonlicking of pipelines, through the potential to accelerate LNG development in a couple of different areas, but always in the frame that Europe puts it in, which is it has to fit within the frame of the fact that we're not just facing an energy security crisis, we still are facing a climate crisis. Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, is front and centre in this oil-fueled showdown, and she's not beating around the bush. If the US plays hard, we'll start pumping oil to Europe. Let's see how long they last without us. Smells like a political teller. No might right now. Alberta sends 700,000 barrels a day down to the Gulf Coast. It's basically pouring Red Bull straight into the US refining system. But if that flow gets cut, game over. Texas might have to chug energy drinks from Venezuela. And let's be real, everyone knows fake stuff hits different and not in a good way. The US loves to say, we're energy independent, we're fine. But just like that ex who keeps checking their old flame story every day, the US still secretly needs Canada's oil. If Canada pulls back, gas prices in New England could jump like housing prices in San Francisco. We're talking 20 to 40 cents more per gallon. And don't forget electricity. Canada is also a giant charging station for the US, sending over 11,000 gigawatt-hours of power every year. Can the US replace that? Sure. By waiting for shipments from Venezuela, the Middle East, or hoping Elon Musk figures out how to make electricity from the human brain. This isn't just about oil, it's a full-blown tit-for-tat between Trump and the Canadian government. Trump brought back tariffs on steel, dairy, and Cars Canada hit back with a classic, "Okay, just wait, we'll target your ethanol." Now ethanol produced in the US, as much as memes about Trump, is a lifeline for American farmers. And Canada has been buying it up like crazy to fuel its clean energy programs. But if Canada pulls the plug, farmers in Iowa might actually lose it. Meanwhile, Europe, like a freshly single ex just dumped by Russia, is desperately looking for a nice energy source, and Canada shows up like a gentleman, bringing cedar and a few million barrels of oil. In March 2025 alone, Canada exported 8 million barrels to the EU, double the previous quarter. The EU might be the new lover, but is this true love, or just a rebound after breaking up with Putin? Canada is making a serious glow-up from the sweet girl next door to a major player in the global energy game. And it's not just about oil, we're talking about uranium for clean nuclear reactors, rare minerals for electric vehicles, and clean electricity to charge the entire US grid. With this kind of energy combo, Canada isn't just selling fuel, it's selling influence in a post-fossil fuel world. Canada could be the Switzerland of energy neutral, but absolutely essential. So what do you think? If Canada really shifts its strategy, will the US come crawling back or go looking for a third party like Venezuela? Better hold on to that gas pump, because this energy storm is just getting started. And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. This decision has led Trump to face global reactions, with the EU and Germany launching an all-out attack on the US. The decision to impose a 25% tariff on cars imported from Germany could increase the price of these vehicles by $5,000 to $7,000 each, a significant amount for US consumers by 2024. The US imports nearly 3 million cars from Germany annually, with a total export value of $35 billion in cars from Germany to the US. German car brands such as BMW, Audi, and Mercedes-Benz will face the biggest direct impact from this tariff policy, forcing them to reconsider their pricing strategies and production. In the US market, German automakers will face a major challenge in maintaining their market share in the US, as consumers may look for alternative options from other brands. Furthermore, the price increase on cars could lead US consumers to pay higher prices for these vehicles, reducing their purchasing power immediately after the announcement of this tariff decision. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz strongly criticized President Trump's move. This warning not only reflects Germany's strong opposition, but also signals that this trade war could have far-reaching effects on industries worldwide. Germany views this tariff as not just an economic confrontation, but also an assault on the long-standing trade values between nations. German car brands such as BMW, Audi, and Mercedes-Benz are key players in the US economy, and the imposition of this tariff could drive both economies into a crisis. Tariffs could be imposed on key US products such as agriculture, technology, And digital services, the EU is considering tariffs of up to 30% on US agricultural products like soybeans, beef and corn, with a total export value of around $12 billion each year. Not stopping there. US tech giants like Amazon, Apple and Google may face tariffs of up to 20%. This shows that the EU is not just reacting to the car tariff policy, but is preparing for a comprehensive trade war, and it will not be easy for the US to avoid the impact of these measures. Trump's decision to impose this tariff not only has a severe impact on trade, relations between the US and Germany, but it also provoked strong reactions from other countries, like Canada, Japan, and South Korea. Canada, a close ally of the US, has voiced its criticism of this decision and declared it will implement retaliatory measures against US goods worth about $7 billion. Additionally, countries like Japan and South Korea are concerned that this tariff policy will affect their automotive and technology industries. As Japanese and South Korean companies also export cars to the US, this tariff could trigger a global backlash, forcing the US to face consequences from all its partner nations. Not only that these countries may begin seeking alternative trade partners to reduce their dependence on the US, this could lead Trump into a situation of gradual isolation, not only in trade relations, but also on the international political stage. While Trump may feel proud of his tariff policies, they are causing cracks within the US. Voters in key states like Florida and Wisconsin are beginning to doubt the effectiveness of Trump's decisions, creating a backlash within the Republican Party. Florida and Wisconsin, once considered Trump's and the Republican Party's home turf, are now seeing Democratic candidates making significant gains, forcing Trump into a political panic. Can he maintain support in his home turf, or will he face a shift in strategy to win over voters, especially as support from traditional voters continues to fade? A tariff storm is sinking everything from the price of your morning coffee to relationships with longtime allies are Americans. Paying the price for Trump's policies, the Trump administration once again begins with controversial economic decisions under the guise of protecting national interests. Trump imposes a series of high tariffs on steel, aluminum, and cars, not just on traditional rivals, but also on longtime allies like Canada and Germany. One of the reasons given to stop fentanyl, a dangerous opioid, from entering the US via Canada. However, data shows less than 1% of fentanyl in the US comes from Canada, making this argument rather weak. Meanwhile, the consequences of these tariffs are clear in everyday life. Gas prices are rising, food is becoming more expensive, the financial markets are volatile. Americans, especially working-class citizens and retirees, are feeling the full impact of these policies. What was supposed to be a strong stance is now becoming a financial burden on ordinary Americans. While creating global turmoil, Canada has stopped staying silent. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly publicly declared the relationship between the US and Canada will never be the same. And we understand that, and that's why we will seek to make sure that we get to an agreement after heavy tariffs were placed on steel, aluminum, and cars exported to the US. Canada immediately retaliated by imposing its own tariffs on US goods. This isn't just about economics. It's a strategic loss of trust between two nations with the longest border in the world. Prime Minister Mark Carney also spoke out all attempts to wear us down, to break us down, so that America can own us, saying Canada is ready to protect its citizens' interests and urging this American people to speak up to their political representatives. This confrontation is no longer confined to the negotiation table, it's spilling over into the social fabric of both countries. American businesses aren't immune to the damage as they lose a stable supply chain. What was once considered a model of cooperation, the US and Canada now stand on the verge of a breakdown of trust that has lasted for decades. China reacted strongly to the new US tariffs, including tariffs as high as 104% the Chinese government declared it would. retaliate if forced with measures like increasing tariffs on soybeans and sorghum. Key U.S. exports, they also suspended cooperation on fentanyl control and limited American products and services from movies to financial firms. China's hardline response became even more evident after U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance made a controversial statement calling Chinese manufacturers farmers. This wave of strong opposition from China has only heightened tensions between the two nations, and the trade war continues to cause losses for both.